So as it relates to your licensing exam, probably the simplest and perhaps the most accurate explanation as to why you're having so much anxiety is simply that your brain perceives your licensing exam as dangerous. Your brain has made a mental connection, an association that says anything to do with your licensing exam equals danger. And when that association is triggered, it launches an automatic danger response program. Every person has one. Most creatures have one. And it comes in 3 different varieties, which we'll get to in a minute. But that's basically the reason why you're studying for your licensing exam, thinking about your licensing exam, and of course actually taking it can be such a great anxiety producing situation. Because once that program's triggered, it triggers the thoughts, it triggers the body sensations, it triggers the body responses, and you feel a great sense of anxiety. What I'd like to do right now is introduce you to my almost lovely assistant to help explain the details of how this really works. Hi Bruiser, how are you? As you can see, I have an older Chihuahua here, and Bruiser's a pretty cool dog, but recently he had, well, some trauma. His teeth were really bad, and so we actually had to pull all his teeth out. They did save one. Not sure what you're going to do with one tooth, but anyway, he has one left. But that means that we have to feed him. Thank you, Bruiser. I'll put you down now. That means that we have to feed him soft food. Now, because we have another dog, Dolly, who would come in and just eat all the food up, we have to feed them separately now. So that created a bit of a problem for Bruiser. And here's kind of how that happened. So this is the original food dish that we had, and we would actually put that out on the back porch on a cement floor, and as you can see, there's a rubber ring around the outside or the bottom edge of it, which means that between the roughness of the cement and the weight of the metal bowl, it didn't really move much. It just kind of sat there. It didn't go scooting around. However, his new bowl, as you can see, is just this really light plastic thing with almost a sharp edge in the bottom. And since we're feeding him inside on the tile floor, it tends to actually scoot along on the tile as he's eating the food. The problem is once in a while that edge just catches it and it makes a loud squeaking noise which triggers Bruiser's automatic danger response program, and he freaks out, which means he actually backs off and walks away from his food, even while he's still hungry. Take a look. Come on, Bruiser. Come on. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Come on. Yeah? It's okay. Look. Daddy will hold it for you. No? It's okay. Come on. Come on, Bruiser. Come on. It's okay. It's okay, Bruiser. Come on. Come on. Come on. See? I'll hold it for you so don't squeak. Come on. So that gives you kind of a basic understanding as to what's going on. There's something about your licensing exam that's triggering that automatic danger response program in your brain and making it more difficult for you to concentrate, creating all the symptoms of anxiety. But what do we do about it? How do we fix it? Now, of course, for Bruiser, I pretty much have to fix it for him because, well, he's a dog. He's kind of smart as dogs go, but he isn't smart enough to figure that out. For one thing, he can't even really figure out that that sharp sound doesn't actually mean danger. It just feels like it to him, and so that's the way he responds. So what I end up having to do is put his dish on a piece of carpet or a piece of rug, and then that dish won't move around anymore and doesn't make any sounds. Problem solved. Bruiser's eating all his food now. But what about you? What about that licensing exam anxiety? So what I'm going to share with you in this video is 3 steps to breaking that mental connection between your licensing exam and danger. Now, it may not completely break it depending on how far you can get with it, but it can greatly reduce it and in some cases eliminate it. And there's only 3 steps. But before we get started on those 3 steps, I want to first acknowledge that that automatic danger response program actually comes in basically 3 variations: fight, flight, or freeze. Those are the 3 basic variations of the built-in automatic danger response program that you have, I have, and almost all creatures on Earth actually have. For most of us, we have sort of a default automatic danger response program. The one that's, I don't know if you'd say it's our favorite, but it's the one we end up using the most. And usually it's a very unconscious choice. So as it relates to the licensing exam, are there any differences between those 3 variations of the program: fight, flight, or freeze? Well, let me suggest the possibility that if your initial response is usually fight, then perhaps you're going to be a little bit more angry. Maybe there's a sense of unfairness, the test isn't being presented fairly, or the study materials aren't adequate, or somebody's doing something to work against you and you're just getting really frustrated and angry about this whole process. The second automatic danger response program would be flight, or basically running away. And as you've probably figured out, that was actually Bruiser's default mode. When the bowl would move and squeak, he would jump and run away. Now, if that's kind of your default mode, your danger response program, then you're probably going to run into things like procrastinating when you're studying. When you're actually taking a practice test or the real test, you probably have this urge to get up and go do something else. Basically, you're just trying to avoid or run away from anything related to that. Another thing that might sound familiar is you might be putting off your test date. You set the test date, it gets close, and then you reschedule it. It gets close, and then you reschedule it. Number 3, the freeze response. Now, this is kind of interesting, but I would suggest that if this is your dominant or default automatic danger response program, things like this might be more common. You're trying to study for your exam, and your brain just sort of gets foggy, and it's like you're running through really deep sand, mentally speaking, and it's really hard to think. Perhaps maybe even during the exam, your mind just might go completely blank. You might even discover that you actually have a hard time moving, like your body just feels really tired and drained, and you can't hardly move or get yourself going. Now, of course, these are all just possible variations of the basic idea that we all have an automatic danger response program. And regardless of which 3 dominant types of automatic danger response program you have, there's a parts of it that are overlapping for all 3 of them. Almost everybody is going to feel a sense of urgency, tightness in your body, feeling of fear or anxiety, more rapid heartbeat. If you were to measure your blood pressure would probably be going up, and your breathing would be faster, and that's probably going to be universal regardless of which of those 3 patterns you most often fall into. So now let's get on to what's the first step in breaking that mental association or that connection between your licensing exam and danger. The first step in breaking that mental connection in your brain between your licensing exam and danger, so that it triggers that automatic danger response program, is to create a different type of automatic response program, a relaxation response. Now, the one that I'm going to share with you is based on a book called Relax and Win, written by Bud Winters. He was a world-class coach, teaching track and field, especially running, I believe. Won many championships for his college. He also trained several winning Olympic athletes, and was even hired by the United States Navy to help their pilots relax and be able to focus better, fly their planes, win their combats, and not get in trouble themselves very much. And what I'm going to share with you is almost a direct copy from that book, Relax and Win. So step 1 comes in 2 parts. First, we're going to help relax your body, and then we're going to work on relaxing your brain and allowing your this relaxation routine to become something that can be automatically triggered with a small amount of effort. So what I'm going to go through with you right now is the relaxation portion for your body. In a comfortable position, right, relax your facial muscles, including your tongue, jaw, and the muscles around your eyes. If you realize you have a frown, really focus on releasing the area in the center of your forehead. Let your shoulders drop as low as possible. This will also help you stretch and release the tension in your neck. Then relax your upper and lower arm on one side, and then try it with the other arm. Breathe out. Relax your chest. Let your lungs fill with air. Relax your legs. Release the tension from your thighs first, and then let the relaxation travel down to your calves. And finally, focus on your feet and ankles. And to continue that relaxation throughout your body, go ahead and focus on relaxing your jaw and your wrists. It's kind of strange, but having a relaxed jaw and wrists tends to trigger the whole rest of your body to stay in a relaxed state. And this is basically the body relaxation part of step 1. With the entire routine, I highly recommend that you repeat it and practice it at least twice a day. But now let's go on to the mental relaxation portion as well. Now that the muscles in your body are relaxed, it's time to clear your mind completely. To do that, choose to imagine one of these two situations. You are lying in a boat in the middle of a lake on a warm, clear day. So just imagine yourself laying in a boat in the middle of a lake on a warm day. Perhaps on a soft cushion, seeing a nice, clear blue sky, smelling the clear, clean air, the warm sun just off to the side, not blinding, just a light, warm breeze, relaxed in the middle of the lake. Or you can imagine yourself snuggled up in a black velvet hammock in a pitch black room. Not any light at all, just soft comfort surrounding you from every direction. If for some reason one of those images doesn't stop your mind from working, repeat, don't think, don't think, don't think, over and over again for about 10 seconds. And here I would suggest the possibility of an alternative, or at least an addition to either imagine yourself in the boat on the lake or snuggled up in a black velvet hammock. And that is to focus on the feeling of your breath going in and out of your nose and or your mouth. Don't try and change it, just notice it. And when anything else comes to your mind, let that thought pass through and return your focus to the feeling of your breath. If you maintain your focus on the feeling of your breath going in and out of your mouth and your nose, after a while it creates this sort of rhythm and it relaxes your mind and it gives you something to focus on that isn't about activity. One of the things that's most important when you're imagining either one of those scenes or even just focusing on your breath is to focus on a completely relaxed body that doesn't move whatsoever. It's just like you're a blob of like melted ice cream just laying there. So now we're on to step 2 in the part of this process to break that mental connection between your licensing exam and danger, where your brain says, licensing exam is dangerous. So what exactly is step 2? In step 2, we want to mentally connect your relaxation program with your licensing exam. Basically, now in the ideal sense, when you think about your licensing exam, it automatically becomes a trigger for relaxation. Wouldn't that be cool? So start your deep relaxation routine that you've been practicing for a while. When you're in a very relaxed state, then mentally swing into reliving the exam anxiety triggering situations. For some people, it's imagining being actually in the exam, maybe getting to the end and going, oh my goodness, I don't have enough time to finish my questions. Or it might be that fear that you start the exam and your brain just goes blank. Or it might be just studying for the exam is triggering all kinds of anxiety. All of a sudden you're worried about, well, what happens if I don't pass my exam? How am I going to keep my job? Etc., etc. After you're in this very relaxed state, then go to try and imagine those things. When your anxiety starts to creep back up, then swing back into your relaxation program or the relaxation routine until you return back to deep relaxation. And then again swing back to imagining the exam anxiety situations. And basically what you do is rinse and repeat as needed. The idea is to swing back and forth between the calm, relaxed state that you've trained yourself to have and the situations that trigger your anxiety related to your licensing exam. In fact, it might be helpful for you to actually pull out some of your study materials or sit in front of your computer where you're ready to take a practice test. Do that deep relaxation routine, both the body and the mind, and then start the study process. The ultimate goal is to maintain your relaxed state while mentally reliving license test anxiety situations. If you can do it well enough, eventually your license exam related material, thoughts, books, programs, the testing center will actually trigger calm relaxation. Now I know it seems incredible that being around your licensing exam, studying for it, thinking about it could ever trigger relaxation. But I've actually had that experience. Now I didn't know the technique that I've shared with you in this video at that time. At the time, all I knew was a basic rudimentary version of mindfulness. And so what I actually did when I was studying for my exam, I became so anxious I had a hard time focusing just on the studying. And I was months away from ever even taking the exam. So I wasn't sure what to do. But having learned this basic mindfulness approach, I literally would sit on my bed, put the study book in my lap, I would open it up to some portion where I might study, and then I would literally close my eyes and try to go into this very deeply relaxed state. Now, of course, the first few times it was very difficult, and it took me a long time to be successful to actually get in this relaxed state. But by doing that repeatedly every single time I sat down to study, eventually my brain created a completely different association. And when I grabbed my study materials, sit down and put it in front of me, I would actually feel myself relax. It's pretty incredible, but actually true. Completing steps 1 and 2 could greatly reduce your anxiety and increase your test confidence. But if it is not enough, here's the likely problem. So if completing steps 1 and 2 aren't enough to really fully remove your anxiety to the level that you're okay with taking your licensing exam, then the most likely thing that's getting in the way is probably some earlier experience in your life that's programmed your brain to trigger your automatic danger response program. Let me illustrate going back to the story of Bruiser. Now you might have been asking yourself, why is it that Bruiser actually is so scared of a high-pitched squeaky sound? Well, here's the answer. This is actually a radio collar receiver. It's a radio receiver. It's paired up with a transmitter that you plug in to the wall, and then you can adjust the signal, and depending on how strong the signal is, it can go further out or closer in. When your pet or your dog wears this collar, which is basically a radio receiver, the dog can go out to the edge of the transmission area for that radio transmitter. When it gets to the edge, it gives a sharp-pitched little squeaky beep. If the dog continues out to the edge or beyond the edge, then what happens next is what caused Bruiser to be so afraid. These little metal prongs, those go up through his fur and touch his skin, and when he goes beyond the boundaries of where he's supposed to go, it gives him an electric shock. Now, of course, it's not enough to do him any damage, but it is enough to make him quite uncomfortable. And it scares him, especially for a dog with that kind of temperament. Now, what I'm suggesting is that you actually have a similar experience in your life, and that's the reason why it's so hard for you to get past that triggered anxiety. For the sake of illustration, I'm going to use a made-up story to illustrate how earlier experiences could have programmed your brain in such a way to create this trigger to set off the automatic danger response program in your brain. So we're going to say that, in fact, when you were in the 2nd grade, you were taking a test, and the teacher told you the test was going to be on subtraction. And not only was the test not on subtraction, it turned out to be on multiplication, but also you had had maybe some difficulty sleeping the night before, and so you were extra tired. And you just didn't do well on this test. When the test comes back, your seatmate or your classmate sitting next to you sees the F and they start making fun of you. You basically find yourself being super, super embarrassed, and you feel like you're just going to die of embarrassment. And that becomes this emotional learning, or this trigger in your brain. Ever after that, your brain's on a subconscious level searching and keeping an eye out for anything that looks like an exam. And when it comes up, it says, danger, danger, danger. And that's how that original trigger gets programmed into your brain. The reason why steps 1 and 2 are not enough to deal with that kind of early experience in your life, what I call an original programming experience, because steps 1 and 2 create an alternative response to your licensing exam. You have the original response, which was the automatic danger response and high anxiety, but now that you've gone through steps 1 and 2, you also have a secondary response, which could be deeper relaxation. It's sort of like creating a Y in a road. When your brain experiences the licensing exam, whether it's studying, thinking about it, taking a practice test, or actually being an exam, now you sort of have two potential ways that you can go with your responses. However, it does not remove that original programming from earlier events in your life. It just simply gives you two options. So that brings us to step 3 of this process. Now, step 3 is all about basically removing the trigger from those early experiences that trained your brain to associate a test or some sort of evaluating process with the danger, and thus triggering the automatic danger response program in your brain. Once that trigger is actually removed, then it just doesn't trigger it anymore. So I believe this is basically part of God's design for our brain and body to be able to heal itself. So I will be going over the 5 parts or steps to the memory reconsolidation process. I won't have enough time in this video to give you enough details so that you can actually use this to work through the process yourself, but at least you'll know what to look for and what you need to learn more about, or the kind of person that might be most helpful to you who actually knows how this memory reconsolidation process works. So the 5 parts start out with the simple, well, maybe not the simple one, but the obvious one. Identify which specific event has created that program in your brain to indicate that this is danger. So in the case of our little made-up example, the event is pretty simple. It's that time when you're back in 2nd grade and you failed the exam and your classmates are making fun of you and you're feeling just absolutely awful. So that's the identified event that most likely programmed that belief into your brain. So the next part in the process is to identify contradictory information that basically invalidates or gives you a completely different perspective on how you might feel and think about that earlier event. Now, at first that may seem very difficult because the event is the way it happened, right? You can't change it? Well, that's true, but because your brain only knows what comes through your senses and into your brain as reality, you actually have quite a bit of flexibility in how to either identify or create contradictory information. So one thing is that you can, or one method is simply for you to be able to look back at that earlier event and compare it to your adult understanding of it now. So it might go something like, yeah, it really, really sucked and it really hurt so much back then, but here I am 10, 15 years later and I'm okay. I don't have a major problem. I can function. Most of the time I do okay on my tests. I just have some anxiety around this one. I'm about ready to start a new career. It wasn't a life-ending event. It felt like it, but it wasn't. Another way to come up with some sort of contradiction or something that feels radically different associated with that, or that you could associate with that event, is to actually make something up. imagine something. So literally you could actually imagine that you went back to your teacher, asked them to be able to retake your exam, and 2 days later you took the exam and you got an A. And so now instead of your classmates making fun of you, you actually got a higher grade than they did. They actually start praising you. Now if you go back and imagine that in a really deep way, it literally creates a competing memory that would be directly associated with that original memory. And finally, a third way that you can create contradictory information is simply to use the first two parts of step 1 in conjunction with reviewing this memory. So what you do is you actually go through the body and the brain relaxing exercises, get yourself into a very relaxed state, which is completely opposite of the way you felt at the time when you failed that test and your classmate was making fun of you. So now that you have identified this contradictory information, the next step is to actually open up that original memory and actually activate those same neural pathways that are holding that exact memory. Now that sounds a bit more complicated than it really is, because all it really requires is for you to remember that event. Now not just remember that it happened, but remember it in vivid detail, like you're reliving that event. And so now the next part of it is, and this is where the change part starts taking place, is that while you're reliving that original event, you pull into your awareness that contradictory information. So you're literally holding in your brain simultaneously the original event and how you felt and how you experienced it while you're recalling and reviewing that contradictory information. So it might go something like this. You know, I just hurt so bad. I can't believe it. I failed so badly, and everybody's going to hate me and think that I'm stupid, and I can't survive this. But I did survive it. It's now like 15, 20 years later. I've gone further in my education. I'm looking forward to a new career, and I'm some version of okay. You see the juxtaposition, how those two things are contradictory, being held side by side? Or put another way, oh, it was so terrible, it was so awful, I can't believe Johnny's saying those things about me, I just wish the ground would open up and swallow me. But 2 days later I took the test again and I got an A, which was actually better than the grade he got. Or again, oh, I can't imagine, I want to melt. I just want to go away and never ever go back to school again. I can never face these people again. But I feel so relaxed. I'm okay. It felt so bad. I feel so bad there. But I'm relaxed. I'm okay. I survived. I'm alive. I am okay. And so the idea then is to simply repeat those pairings again and again and again. And after a while, your brain just kind of goes click, uncouples it from triggering that automatic danger response program that was created back in that time when you created that memory. So literally, the memory no longer triggers that emotional response. You can remember it, but it just doesn't have the pain, the anxiety, the frustration connected with it. Now I know this process may seem a little bit complicated, and to a certain extent it is, but it's not that bad once you really learn it. But the results are so worth it. One client I worked with, she described the results as being something like this. Thinking back about some of those memories that hurt her so much, she said it's kind of like trying to light a firecracker that's already gone off. You can remember the memory, you know what happened, but it just doesn't bother you anymore. It doesn't trigger all those same feelings and memories. It doesn't make your body react in the same way. And imagine if that were possible for your licensing exam, where there's just no earlier trigger, then really your licensing exam would trigger the level of anxiety of pretty much any new thing with a bit of pressure, which would probably be very, very manageable and something that wouldn't interfere with your ability to actually take your licensing exam. So the next question is, what could you do to actually activate and go through that memory reconsolidation process? And what I'm going to share with you right now is basically just a list of techniques that activate the memory reconsolidation process. So if you choose to do it on your own or to work with somebody who knows how to take you through that process, you kind of know what to look for. I'm going to list 3, but honestly there's probably half a dozen or more methods that actually will activate this memory reconsolidation process. The technique I'm most familiar with, and the one that I use with a lot of clients, is called emotional freedom techniques, also known as EFT or tapping. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or EMDR, is also another method that activates the memory reconsolidation process. And the last one I'm mentioning to you right now is called coherence therapy. And the one thing that's really unique about that, it was developed by some therapists who did a lot of research around memory reconsolidation process. And coherence therapy is essentially a type of therapy where they literally match the exact steps of the memory reconsolidation process with techniques to specifically activate the memory reconsolidation process. So if that's something that you feel like you need to do, you've gone through steps 1 and 2 and it's just not cutting your anxiety enough, and you need to move on to step 3, these are the kinds of things you need to learn a little bit more about so that you can either activate that memory reconsolidation process for yourself or find a coach or a therapist who knows how to use that to help you work through those issues and literally remove that connection from the earlier events so that it's no longer adding to the anxiety with your licensing exam. I hope you found this video interesting, perhaps a little bit entertaining, and I wish you all the best in your licensing exam and your future career. God bless and have a good day.